Welcome to session 4 of Creation Apologetics. I'm Gary Locklair. Thanks for being here. Before we get into the outline for today, let me just share with you a few of the important points that I hope to cover, and I hope you'll remember from today. First of all, as we mentioned last time, I want you to know that there are scientific evidences to support the creation model of origins. We saw those last time, and we'll see a number this time also. One of the important ideas from today is the concept of information. Information content, you can think of that as a code. The information content in life demands a primary cause, God. Living cells were designed with plan and purpose. This is powerful evidence for creation. I want to show you some very simple ways that you can share this with the honest skeptic. Think about it this way. An intelligent person, an intelligent creator can make a complex machine. It's certain and it's reasonable. On the other hand, evolution cannot create life naturally. That's a foolish idea. Apologetics provides positive evidence for creation and refutes evolution. Speaking of apology, some of you know that I'm a professor of computer science. I was surprised when a student came up to me the other day and apologized and said, "I'm sorry, I don't have my homework." And I said, "Why don't you have your homework?" He said, "The dog ate my homework." I said, "Come on, do you expect me to believe that your dog ate your coding assignment?" Well, the student said, "To be honest, it did take him a few bites." Yeah, I know. We better actually begin. As with the other sessions, there is a handout. And I've referenced, well, let me show you the handout first of all, so you know that. Oh, okay. We'll try to share that with you. Let's see if that's entirely possible. Who knows? I told you my love affair with technology. Session 4, Apologetics and the Creation of Life. What I'd like to do is to begin with the stanzas of a hymn. If you pay attention, you'll notice that there are many hymns that talk about creation and God as creator. We have wonderful hymnody in the Lutheran Church, and so many of our hymns focus on God as creator. In Christian worship, the 2021 version, this is hymn 614, Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise. Let me bring up some stanzas of that. I'll just read a couple of them for you. Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light from our eyes, most blessed, most glorious, O Ancient of Days, almighty, victorious, your great name we praise. Unresting, unhasting, and silent as light, not wanting nor wasting, you rule in your might. Your justice like mountains high soaring above, your clouds which are fountains of goodness and love. All life you engender in great and in small, to all life befriender, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish in riches and range, we wither and perish, but you never change. Great Father of glory, pure Father of light, your angels adore you in veiling their sight. All laud we would render, O lead us to see the light of your splendor, your love's majesty. Let's take a look. I have a great quote on the handout there from Martin Luther, but let's take a look at Genesis just to get the sense for the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about today. You know, before I show this and we read this account in Genesis, I want to share something important with you. We're talking today about the origin of life. Now, in the evolution model, evolution talks about the origin of life as a step-by-step process. Chemicals, biochemicals, first stirrings, portions of cells, full cells, and then that all diversified. That story is not part of creation. God created all different kinds of living things, creatures great and small. Yes, one-celled creatures like amoeba, and multi-celled creatures like human beings too. So although we'll focus on the origin of life today, just get out of your mind this idea that there's some kind of step-by-step progression here. God created all kinds of living things. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 1, some selected verses here dealing with life. Genesis 1, first 11 through 13. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Verses 20 through 23. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And then verses 24 and 25. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. We have different kinds of life, and we'll focus on that the next time we meet. But today, let's just focus on the idea of life. I love this quote from Luther in Luther's commentary on Genesis. The Holy Spirit broods. You remember up front in Genesis, the Holy Spirit was hovering over the waters during creation, that he might infuse life into these elementary substances with which afterwards to be animated and garnished. For the office of the Holy Spirit is to give life. So let's take a look at the idea of the origin of life in the creation model. Your honest skeptic friend comes up to you and says, but doesn't evolution show that life evolved naturally? Why do we need a God if chemicals can change into living things naturally? How do you respond? I know by now you're thinking, well, the first thing I better do is to clarify. Be sure I understand what they're asking, ask some questions, and then let's find some positive evidences, and that's what we'll investigate today. In our study, we've been taking a look at how often creation is mentioned in the biblical text. And if you don't know, creation is mentioned often. I've tried to point out 6 specific verses each time. This is our 4th time. So let's look at some more specific verses dealing with creation. I've picked 3 from the Old Testament, 3 from the New Testament. Psalm 104, verse 30. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. The Spirit creating life. Nehemiah 9:6. You are the Lord, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. And you preserve all of them, and the host of heaven worships you. Jeremiah chapter 10:16. Not like these is he who is the portion of Jacob, for he is the one who formed all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. You recognize by now that creation is not limited to the Old Testament. Luke chapter 11. And the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? God created all life. Romans chapter 11, 33 through 36. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Who has been his counselor? Or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. From him, through him, to him. From him are all things. Colossians chapter 1, 15 through 17. He, talking of Jesus Christ, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Is creation important doctrine? Absolutely. It's foundational. It's mentioned all over the Bible. So let's go back to 1 Peter, that verse that we're using to help us understand apologetics. But in your hearts, honor Christ. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So what are the 3 steps in apologetics? First of all, an honest skeptic asks you a question. Hasn't evolution shown that life can arise naturally? Make sure you understand. Ask questions if you don't understand. Clarify. We don't want to answer the wrong question. Secondly, provide positive evidences for creation. We'll see 3 very powerful positive evidences today that God created life, and it could not evolve naturally. The third step is just that. We will refute the bad idea, but begin with the positive. You may not even have to refute evolution. Begin with the positive, but if necessary, refute those ideas, those poor and foolish ideas of evolution. Did you hear about the 2 guys who were arrested for stealing a calendar? They each got 6 months. I'm recording this after the fact, but there was loud and raucous laughter when I said that live. My friend Zeb and I were in a place near Cairo, Illinois recently. You know, there's a number of places in the United States where you can stand and be in several states at once. Probably know about 4 Corners and Southwest. Well, outside of Cairo, Illinois, there's a place where you can stand in 3 states at the same time. You're in Illinois, you're also can stand in Kentucky and also in Missouri. And I said, hey, Zeb, look, we're in 3 states at once. And Zeb said, oh, actually, I'm in a 4th state. I said, what's that? He said, clinical depression. I said, I'm sorry, Zeb, you can only count Illinois once. What are the positive evidences for creation? To review, creation is a scientific model that states God, a supreme intelligence, created everything, including life, fully formed and fully functional in a very short time. Now, I'm going to use a couple big words today. Sorry. First of all, God created life as matter, stuff, with teleonomy. Teleonomy is a fancy word that just means information content. In other words, life isn't just stuff. It's not just chemical compounds. Life is matter, to be sure, but it's matter with this special ingredient, information. Living things aren't just physical. They're not just stuff. They are informational also. When you look at Genesis 1, you see that. We see God, the source of information, infusing it. Luther was talking about the Spirit doing that. It's sometimes easier to think about this when we think about the negative aspects and respond to the negative aspects of evolution. Evolution supposes that life originally formed on planet Earth naturally and built itself up step by step by step. Hydrogen and helium got together with carbon, produced some organic compounds, and that produced something else like an amino acid, and that produced a protein, and that produced the precursors of RNA, and that ultimately produced, and then you get cells, and then you have, I'm sorry, that can't work. Let's take a look at 3 evidences for the creation model. Evidence 1, information theory. Ooh, I know that sounds scary, doesn't it? And as a graduate student, I took 3 semesters of information theory, and it can be quite heady, full of math and science, etc. But let me explain it in a very straightforward way that you'll understand, you can explain to other people, and impress your friends. Information theory. Let's take a look at 2 verses. We'll look at Proverbs 8 in a moment, but first of all, Proverbs 1:7. Many of you probably have this committed to memory. Great verse. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. What does information theory say? And then why is that important in origins, and what's it have to do with life? Information theory says intelligence is necessary to create information. Intelligence is necessary to create information. Or let's flip it around. If you have information, that must have come from intelligence. Information, think of codes, whether it's a written code, a secret code, a computer code. Information or codes cannot arise naturally. Information cannot arise spontaneously. Here's my straightforward example. You'll be able to understand this and be able to share with anyone. Imagine you just read a good book. How about this book here? You just read this book. It's a good book. And when you put it down, you say, wow, what a great author. I wish I could read more that he or she wrote. And then your honest skeptic jumps in and says, well, wait a minute. How do you know that book had an author? Did you see the author write this book? No. Do you know the author? Now, of course, for those of us here at St. Matthew, that's funny because the author is Ren Kramer, and we all know him, and he's sitting right here today too. But imagine it was a different book. These are the books that I'm hoping you will check out from me. Books dealing with gender identity and the horrible thing that some folks are doing to our children. This is Abigail Shrier. I've never met her. I was hoping to at one time, but I didn't, even though there's a picture there. I don't know. Here's a book full of information. Did this book have an author? Yes. Now, how do you know? Have you ever seen the author? No. No. How do you know the book had an author? If you're a reasonable person, you're saying, what a ridiculous question. Now, how do you prove? Even though you didn't see the author write the book, how do you prove it? Answer, information theory. The information content in the book, the words, that English code, had to have come from an intelligent source. Nobody thinks that phones bring the phone out of my pocket here. Nobody thinks that phones naturally spontaneous develop step by step. That's ridiculous. Informational devices must have come from intelligent sources. As a computer scientist, I can tell you that codes don't arise spontaneously. Computers do not program themselves. Software does not arise step by step naturally, spontaneously. What's this have to do with the creation of life? Well, my background today gives many of you a hint. Is there information in life? Yes. Every one of the trillions of cells in your body contains DNA. DNA is information. The effects of intelligence are recognized by the communication of information. A living cell is full of information. Question: where did that information come from originally in the beginning? Could it have arisen spontaneously? No. The only scientific answer is it must have been created by an omnipotent intelligence and infused in matter. And that's exactly what happened. What's the interpretation of information theory? The existence of information in living cells demands a primary cause for life, a creator. Let me share something with you. Proverbs chapter 8. Proverbs, many folks, we have Bible readings, we go through various books of the Bible, etc. Proverbs is one of those books that's really cool because there's 31 chapters. And if you read one chapter a day, now in some months you can't read 29, 30, 31, but you get through a lot of it and you can read it and reread it. On the 8th, you read Proverbs 8. Proverbs 8 is a great chapter. Let me share just one verse out of that and share with you also a great interpretation from K&D. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 22. Oops, it's not there. I have to share it, the verse with you. I don't even have it. Do you know what Proverbs chapter 8, verse 22 says? Wisdom, the chapter begins, dwell with prudence. Wisdom was brought forth as the first of God's works. When you read through Proverbs chapter 8, some people think, oh, maybe they're talking about Jesus. No, they're really not. The writer of Proverbs, Solomon here, and I love the way that K&D, this is a classic Lutheran conservative commentary from the 20th century. They say wisdom takes now a new departure in establishing a right to be heard and to be obeyed and loved by men. Wisdom is not God, but is God's. She has personal existence in the Logos of the New Testament, but is not herself the Logos. She's not Christ, but she is from God. She is the world idea, which once projected is objective to God, not as a dead form, but as a living spiritual image. She is the archetype of the world, which, originating from God, stands before God, the world of the idea which forms the medium between the Godhead and the world of actual existence, the communicated spiritual power in the origination and the completion of the world as God designed it to be. This wisdom, the poet here is Solomon, personifies. He does not speak of the person as Logos, but the further progress of the revelation points to her actual personification in the Logos. Whoa, I know that's a lot. What's going on here? Proverbs 8 is information theory. This is so cool. Proverbs 8 shows clearly that wisdom, we'd say information, wisdom comes from intelligence. God, intelligence, birth, information, wisdom. It's the only way it gets there, right? Regardless, everyone accepts DNA is information. What is its origin? Intelligent design of the code? That's reasonable science. Natural development of a code randomly over time? That's a foolish fairy tale. By the way, DNA is more wonderful than we know. When I was a little boy, we talked about DNA as just a linear code, and people said, oh, there's a lot of junk in DNA. There's stuff that doesn't mean anything. You've probably still heard that, right? Sections of junk DNA. No. The more we read and understand, the more amazing DNA becomes. First of all, there's no junk DNA. Everything in that molecule has a purpose. When I was a little boy, they taught us, okay, look, DNA is sort of like a linear code. You know, you read a book, top to bottom, left to right, that says what you are. DNA is more than just a code. It's also the program, kind of like object-oriented programming. DNA is both data and instructions. And here's another thing about DNA. DNA can be read forward to backward, forward, front to back, and makes sense, and the protein codes it, does something. DNA can also be read, the same strand can be read backwards and to the beginning, and that means something different. The protein does it that way, and it gets a different function. And it can fold. DNA can fold in 3 dimensions, and the proteins can read that, and it can do stuff. Imagine if you can read a book that can be read forward to backward and understandable, but also backward to forward and understandable. And sometimes you could flip a few pages and fold them up and read them across, and it still means something. Think about the engineering design far beyond anything we can currently understand. DNA is powerful evidence. When the honest skeptic asks us, hey, doesn't evolution show that life can form naturally? We can say, no, actually, science in the form of information theory shows that the information, the code in DNA, must have come from an outside intelligence. Codes come from intelligence. Speaking of codes, I read this story. Did you see it too? The Norwegian Navy has put barcodes, large barcodes, on the sides of their warships. You might wonder why that is. It's so when they sail back in port, they can scan the Navy in, Scandinavian. Okay, now I've just blown my whole stuff about information theory. He said that wasn't very intelligent. Evidence 1, information theory. Evidence 2, the law of biogenesis. Again, sounds scary, but the law of biogenesis is simple. Here's what it says. Life only comes from life. The law of biogenesis, life only comes from life. This is really the work of Dr. Louis Pasteur. Let's take a look at 2 verses to help set the stage before we look at this. The first is Isaiah 42, verse 5. This is what God the Lord says. He who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and all that comes out of it, who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk on it. John chapter 6, verse 63. The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. Natural processes? Nope. The words I have spoken, Jesus says, to you are spirit and they are life. Yeah. So what does the law of biogenesis say? Now, let's review some things. A couple weeks ago, I shared with you that science can prove nothing. There's no absolute proof in science. Yet some things are so well established and seem so sensible that we refer to them as the law. For example, the law of gravity. It works all the time that we can tell, except in really strange places like event horizons of black holes and white holes, but ignore that. The law of biogenesis is something similar. We've never seen we have never seen it violated. As a matter of fact, we've got experimental evidence that shows it cannot happen. There have been many scientists over the years to work on this, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. Louis Pasteur. What's it say again? Life only comes from life. In other words, life cannot arise spontaneously, naturally from dead matter. Life doesn't come from dead stuff. Life only comes from life. Our sensible analysis verifies that. Here's my example. If you're going to open up a can of Campbell's Chunky Classic Chicken Noodle Soup, are you very hesitant? Are you worried that there could be a mutant life form growing in here? No, we're not. Why not? Because this has been pasteurized. Any living thing has been killed, and then it's been sealed. So as long as the seal's intact, the can's not punctured. This dead matter in here is not going to spring to life. It's not going to become some kind of funny mutant life form. Dr. Louis Pasteur was a Christian and a scientist who accepted the creation model of origins. You recognize him, instrumental in developing and helping us understand vaccines and vaccinations. I got this great quote. Louis Pasteur was fascinated by crystals. He said he looked upon crystals as direct evidence for the artistic expression of God, the Creator. He also said that he believes that science brings men closer to God. He's the one that found evidence of wisdom and design, not randomness and chaos. Pasteur, another quote, "The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator." Pasteur unlocked the mystery of rabies, anthrax, cholera, silkworm, development of vaccines, including rabies. And for us, he debunked the evolutionary myth of spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation is the idea that dead matter can build itself up to living things. Pasteur ran scientific experiments for several years and showed that dead matter cannot change into living things. It was really Pasteur that set the stage for modern biology and biochemistry. Excellent. What's the interpretation of the law of biogenesis? The law of biogenesis says life was created by a living God. Life does not and cannot form itself naturally, step by step from dead matter. Life had to have been created by a living God. The law of biogenesis, bio means life, and genesis, of course, means origin. So the law of biogenesis is life giving life. Refutes spontaneous generation. So our first evidence, information theory, you've got a code, had to come from intelligence. Second evidence, law of biogenesis, you got life, it had to have come from life. We came from our parents. Originally, Adam and Eve came from a living God. Third evidence, specified complexity. These sound horrible, but again, I think you'll understand that. Let me explain it to you. Let me give you an analogy, and we'll see how it plays in. What does that mean, specified complexity? Living cells are so complex, they must be designed and engineered. Living cells could not have developed step by step, gradually put a piece here, a piece there. It doesn't work that way. Living cells are so complex and so interdependent that they had to be engineered and designed. Specified complexity. 2 verses here. Let me share with you. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 17. Then I saw all that God had done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all his efforts to search it out, man cannot discover its meaning. Even if the wise man claims he knows, he cannot really comprehend it. God is far above us. So is the living cell, far above our current understanding. Job chapter 38, verse 18. Have you comprehended the vast expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. By the way, this is God questioning Job. And I wouldn't recommend using an apologetic technique when God questions you. Oh, can I have some clarification? No, that won't work then. God is showing Job, you really don't comprehend. I am far above. Specified complexity. You know that cells, a living cell, can repair itself. A living cell can reproduce itself. Living cells have so many feedback mechanisms and interdependencies in them. It's amazing. It's astounding. It had to have been engineered by an intelligent, living God. It could not arise by chance. If you want an example, my friend and mentor at Concordia University, Dr. Phil Arnholt, brilliant scientist, great creationist. He said, you know, if you want to demonstrate the proof of creation to a biologist, show them the Krebs cycle. Biology students are saying, oh no, high school biology, Krebs. We won't go into the Krebs cycle, but it is an amazing feedback mechanism. A dozen or so biochemical steps within the cell that helps the cell create energy, ATP. It defies any natural explanation. It is a hallmark of brilliant engineering. You can't have just one part and anything works. They all have to be together. Let me use my example. By the way, there's another scientist, that's Dr. Michael Behe. He uses a term he calls what I'm calling specified complexity. He calls it irreducible complexity. Great insights into this, and he uses a mousetrap as an analogy to show. I'm going to use a smoke detector. You've seen a smoke detector before. Looks pretty simple, right? Could a smoke detector arise step by step, piece by piece? No. If you don't have all the pieces, and there's not that many of them, it's pretty simple. There's about 8 pieces or so. If they're not all there connected together, it doesn't work. You can't start with the battery and get a 10% smoke detector, and then add some circuitry and get a little bit more, and then add the chamber, get a little more, and then add the radioactive element. Many of them use americium into this. Do you know the little radioactivity in there? Yeah, and get a little more, and then add the detector circuitry, and then add, oh, got to have a horn and a test button, and then, oh, and then it works. Yeah, it works when you, intelligent person, add them all together. Step by step over time, foolish. Nobody would believe that. So what's the interpretation? Living cells. We talked a little about DNA. Go outside of the cell. Go outside of the nucleus where the DNA is. Would you believe that when I was a little boy, that's a true story, people said, oh, the cell is full of junk. There's some things in there that don't do anything. Golgi, endoplasmic reticulum. It's just evolutionary leftovers. No, there are many elements within the cell, and they all have a purpose. Just because we don't know what they are, haven't figured it out yet, doesn't mean that they don't have a purpose. So what's the interpretation? Life was created by an omnipotent God, a master design engineer. He was powerful enough and smart enough to put it all together. Flip side, life could not self-organize. And this is the big difference, this week's difference between creation and evolution. The difference deals with probability, okay? Think about it. What's the probability of an intelligent person creating a complex machine? 100%. Where do you think this came from? Intelligent person. Where do you think your cell phone came? Intelligent. What's the probability that an intelligent, creative person can make a complex machine? Answer, it's certain. Flip it. What's the probability of natural processes forming a complex machine? Answer, 0. Natural processes cannot form complex machines. Okay. Let's expand it. What are we talking about? Life. Yeah, life, living cell, is a very complex machine. Absolutely. Scroll this up a little bit. How did life get here? The scientific, reasonable, and sensible explanation is God created it. Let me call to the witness stand 2 hostile witnesses. A hostile witness is somebody on the other side who is making a point for your side. Evolutionary scientist Richard Dawkins. This is in his first classic book, The Blind Watchmakers, on page 1. Biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed with a purpose. He goes on to say, but we know that's not true. What? Everybody recognizes complex machines. Information theory, law of biogenesis, specified complexity points to intelligent causation, namely God. Yet the living results of natural selection, evolution, overwhelmingly impress us with the illusion of design and plan. Foolish. Sir Fred Hoyle, evolutionary scientist of the 20th century, said, look, folks, some parts of evolution are okay, but the origin of life, no way. No way. As biochemists discover more and more about the awesome complexity of life, he wrote this in the 20th century. He didn't even know about everything we know today. It is apparent that its chances of originating by accident are so minute, they can be completely ruled out. Life cannot have arisen by chance. Sir Fred Hoyle was an evolutionary scientist. Well, if life could not have arisen by chance, where did it come from? I know, and so do you. Here's Dr. Hoyle's other analogy. He talks about a Rubik's Cube. You know how these things work. I can never even solve these anyway. But Fred Hoyle says, what are the odds of solving one of these if you don't know how to do it, or if you're blindfolded? Well, let's say I put it in this bag, and I just shake it up, 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 shake it up. Will I be able to pull it out and it will come out all solved? No. Shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it. Pull it out. Will it come out all solved? No. You can't see it also. No. Put it in the bag, shake it up, shake it, shake, shake it. Oh, look, it came out all solved. No, of course, I have 2 Rubik's Cubes here. Yes, indeedy duty. Fred Hoyle goes on. The odds of forming not a living cell, but just one biomacromolecule are the same as giving 10 to the 50th power people a Rubik's Cube mixed up. Blindfold them, tell them to solve it. The same odds if they all solve it at exactly the same time. What are those odds? The answer is 0. 0. Well, where did life come from? Some of you know, some of you have heard this, haven't you? honest evolutionists will say the odds of life evolving are zero. So where'd life come from? Well, let me tell you another one. Francis Crick. Maybe you remember the name Francis Crick. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of the structure of DNA. Francis Crick, in his book entitled Life Itself, said life could not have evolved naturally on Earth. Where'd it come from? Aliens from outer space. This is called panspermia. Two forms, directed, undirected. It basically says life originated out there and it came to Earth. Well, that's a convenient solution, but not very realistic. By the way, it's interesting, isn't it? Evolutionary scientists want to talk a lot about diversification of life, the origin of different species. If evolution can't get life started, the model is done. If evolution can't get life, there's no reason to talk about diverse kinds of life. Now, is there? Each time I want to mention the age question a little bit because I know age is a tough one. We've bombarded all over the place, PBS and the media, other media. Oh, the Earth is 13.81 billion years. I'm sorry, the universe is 13.81 billion years. The Earth is 4.65 billion years. Life is 3.8 billion years. Complex life, 640 million years, and so it goes on. No, it's not. How do they know? As we saw life last time, it's just an assumption. It's just an assumption. I can make other natural assumptions that show that life is much younger. For example, we know that DNA decays. Look at an old guy like me. My DNA is decaying. If you just left a cell or DNA out in the open, it decays. Crime scene, you can't go to a crime scene months after the fact and expect to find DNA that's usable. It decays rapidly. Organic compounds break down naturally. How long can they last? Could DNA last a few thousand years? Potentially. A few million years? Absolutely not. Mutation rates, and we'll talk about this in life forms and humans in a few weeks. Mutation rates, which we can measure, like in mitochondrial DNA, point to a relatively young line of organisms, thousands of years old, not millions of years old. Carbon-14 are radiometric means of dating, which we will talk about, I promise. Carbon-14 has a very low half-life, thousands of years. Carbon-14 cannot last millions of years, yet we find carbon-14 in everything organic. All organic material contains carbon-14. The only accurate way to determine an age is by a reliable witness. And God in his word makes it plain that the earth and the universe and life are less than 10,000 years old. So how do we answer the honest skeptic? Doesn't evolution show life evolved naturally? Here's my response. No, science shows that life had to have been created. Information theory, law of biogenesis, specified complexity work together to show that life, the living cell, had to have been designed and created by a powerful intelligence. And at the same time, it could not have arisen naturally. Creation is a reasonable, both sensible and scientific explanation for origins. Paul said in Philippians, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Creation, reasonable idea. Natural origins by evolution, that's foolish. Creation by God, that's reasonable. Is creation an important doctrine? Absolutely. Absolutely. And creation, the creation, can serve as a common ground as we interact with honest skeptics. one other thing. I know you won't be able to see this well because of my background. When it goes here, it disappears, including my hand. These are organic molecule models. Some of you may have played with these. It's supposed to represent a simple organic molecule, alanine. Now, there's an interesting thing about organic molecules. That's what makes up all of our cells, right? Amino acids make up proteins, and proteins make up everything else, and that's what gives us DNA and codes, et cetera. Now, you can make amino acids, you can make organic molecules in the laboratory. And when you make them, they come in two varieties. And chemists actually call them left-handed and right-handed. Why? Because they are stereoisomers. They have all the same components, but they're not exact images. They are mirror images. If I go into the biochemistry laboratory and produce an amino acid, which you can do, just dump in the right chemicals, heat it up, and you get it, we'll have about 50% left-handed, about 50% right-handed. But did you know that in all the cells in your body, all of your proteins are made out of left-handed amino acids only? This doesn't make people left-handed, but you're only made out of left-handed amino acids. That's surprising to an evolutionist who can only deal with natural causes. To a creationary folk like us, makes perfect sense. God used this design, plan, and purpose. What's the purpose of apologetics? It's to ultimately point people to Christ. Why don't they want to accept creation? Because they don't want to accept God. They say, whoa, if there's a God, that can't be good news, because I know internally I'm a bad person. God's probably mad at me. I don't want there to be a God. No God. We've got great news. Not only is there a God, but the great news is he knows you're a sinner. His son paid the price to reconnect us. John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life. That life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness has not overcome it. Use creation, use apologetics to ultimately point people to Christ. Finally, speaking of codes, what did the Hershey bar, the marshmallow, and the graham cracker, what did they use to communicate? S'mores code. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Thanks so much. I appreciate your rapt attention. Next week, we're not meeting here during the Bible class time. Next week is Easter. But in 2 weeks, the week after Easter, we'll continue with the origin of diverse kinds of life. Have a blessed Holy Week.